Welcome to Brutally Anna, a podcast about finding love, losing love, and all the things we think about but don't talk about enough. I'm your host, Anna Kai, aka Maybe Both, across social media, here to remind you that life can be beautiful even when it's freaking brutal. While all of us were grieving the loss of our daily freedoms, like buying toilet paper whenever we wanted to in 2020, my guest today, Ashley LeMieux, was also grieving the loss of her unborn son due to sepsis. 4 years later, Ashley has channeled her grief into helping others cope with loss through her chart-topping podcast, Healing Her, her social media channels, and her best-selling books. Ashley, thanks so much for being here today. I have to say, after I went on your podcast, I had a friend of mine reach out who has dealt with a lot of loss in the last couple years and tell me, oh my gosh, I love Ashley. I can't believe you were on her podcast. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, you truly reach people who are going through very, very dark periods in their life. This friend of mine, her mom had been battling cancer for at least 10 years and fought very courageously and finally succumbed to it last year. And then in the same year, her father-in-law passed away very suddenly and they lost their dog of 14 years. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
For anybody to handle. And she's got so much beauty in her life. Like, she has 4 great kids and a great marriage and everything, but it's so hard dealing with that much loss, right? And I feel like my body knew I knew I was coming to talk to you today, but I had the most horrific dream last night, which was not part of my questions that I was going to ask you, but I was like,
I'm nervous.
I was just traumatized by this. And I was like, interesting. I'm going to go talk to my friend, the grief expert, after this. I had this vivid nightmare last night that my dad suddenly had a heart attack and died when my mom was away, which actually should have been an indication that it was a dream because my mom never goes away without my dad. So I should have just been like, this is not real. But I remember that feeling of just, it was horrible. I was just screaming endlessly when I found out, like, my mom went away for one night and my dad dropped dead. And I was like, oh my God. And I woke up my husband. It was 6 a.m. And I was like, oh, I had the most horrible dream. I dreamt that my dad died. And he was like, I can assure you he did not die. I just talked to him at 9:30 p.m. last night on the phone and everything's fine. But wow, I knew that I would feel horrible one day when that inevitably happens. But I remember in the dream saying to whoever I was talking to that it felt like I was being stabbed in the chest and I couldn't even cry. I was literally like, I was trying to cry because crying is a release and I couldn't because I was so upset that it was almost like my body had nothing to give. I was just screaming. So that being said, that was a dream for me. But it wasn't a dream or a nightmare for you. It was very real. And I want to talk about this because it seems like, the whole premise of your work was based off of this really horrific moment in your life. And there's this concept in screenwriting, and I swear I'm going somewhere with this. There's this concept in screenwriting that's called the all is lost moment, which is the point in which the protagonist's story, they lose everything, right? In the movies, they lose their job, their boyfriend or girlfriend leaves them, they get evicted from their house, like everything is just going wrong and they don't know where to go. And that's a very pivotal point in a typical screenplay because they're pushed to the point of no return, and that is the point that they need to enact the change that they were always meant to enact that ultimately leads to their comeback or rebirth. So was losing your son your all is lost moment? And can you walk us through that night and what happened in the ER?
Yeah, okay, this is such a good question. That wasn't my all is lost moment. My all is lost moment actually happened 3 years prior to that. And that's when I felt like all was lost for me. When we got pregnant with my son, Jace, that was kind of my first step back into trusting that life still had good things for me. So making the decision to try to grow our family again by getting pregnant and just like believing that there was a future for us that was full of love and hope and all of the things that we were wanting was such a step forward of faith and trust in God, universe, that like this was the next step in our path. And so, I mean, you never expect to lose someone that you love, right? And we obviously didn't get pregnant ever thinking that I would go through a late pregnancy loss. What had happened, particularly to answer your question of that night, I had gone, like it had been a normal day. But throughout the day, my body started aching and I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe it's because I had gone on a walk with my mom. Pregnancy makes your joints move, so things start hurting in places you didn't know they could hurt. And we'd been planning the nursery that day because we also had just bought a new home. We had moved back to Arizona to be by my family, knowing that we were going to start just really planting roots because this was the new season of hope and love in our lives. And I ended up that night at midnight, I couldn't move. I was screaming in pain and didn't know why. And my husband called the paramedics. They came, and it was scary because COVID had just been closing everything down. And so on a regular day, I probably would have gone to my OB earlier, but because no one was leaving their house and you definitely weren't going to a doctor unless you needed to, I was like, I'm fine, I'll stay at home. Was taken to the hospital where they found out that I had gone septic. And like, who goes septic when you are a healthy, functioning, person? And, but apparently what we now know is that I have this particular type of thing that happens just when I'm pregnant, that if it's not watched, it led to an untrackable UTI that then led to kidney infection. My kidneys were on the verge of failing and I had gone septic. And what sepsis is it's the infection overtakes your body because it goes into your bloodstream. And it is so painful. And they told me that the hardest part of that moment was they told me that that was the day that they had shut out any outside visitors from being able to go in with you. So I needed to be admitted, obviously, to the hospital for we didn't know how long, but my husband couldn't come with me. And I remember feeling so alone. And I just kept saying, I just need you to check the baby. I need you to check on our baby. Then I can get through anything. How many weeks were
you at that point?
At that point, I was 16.
Okay.
And they wheeled me down and the baby was great. Saw his heartbeat. I was like, okay, we're good. I can do anything. But then the next morning, I wasn't okay. And I had gone through so much pain. And there was this moment where it's a rapid response team is called in and there's all these doctors around me because I'm telling them I can't breathe and my body just feels like it's on fire everywhere. And in that moment, I just had this knowing, like my intuition, I think especially as a mom, I just knew that there was no way that I could survive what had just happened and also keep my baby alive through that experience too. And so again, I asked for another ultrasound. It took them a while to get me one. And that night, found out that we had lost him. And they told me I had time to make they told me I had time, but what ended up happening was that I ended up delivering him all by myself the next morning. And up till that point, they still hadn't allowed anyone to come and be with me. And I found myself being so pissed because I thought that that was my next right step in life. And I had felt just like life took me and just kicked me again. And I didn't know how I could possibly move forward. So that's a lot. That's what happened.
That's a lot, given that you had already had a massive loss in your life, which actually ties really well into my second question is that, when you go through a traumatic loss of a loved one, it sort of feels like the grief is never going to go away when you're in it, especially in the beginning. It's like, how do I even move on from here? How long did that stage last for you after you lost your son? And what advice would you have to the people listening that are currently in the depths of grief right now and just feel like, which way is up?
I love this question because I feel like we've been taught wrong. We've been taught wrong and taught that grief is something that we move on from and we have to get over. But what I have learned is that grief is actually something to be experienced. And as we learn how to experience grief, it changes us, of course, and it changes our view of ourselves and lives and the people around us. But it also allows us to start carrying our grief differently. It took me a little bit, but I learned and I finally accepted that grief isn't something that ever goes away. How could it? Your love never goes away for that person that you're missing, right? Like that grief is the price that we pay for love. And so I had to learn, how do I keep experiencing grief while also experiencing all the other parts of my life too, so that I like using the word and of I feel grief and I also feel a lot of joy. And there's still so much future for me ahead. And so if you are in this space right now where you're like, I literally don't know what to do, when you are in the acuteness of grief, I think that hearing something like this makes you might want to like punch me in the face, right? Like, what do you mean grief is something to be experienced and doesn't ever go away? And so right now you're just trying to survive and you just take it minute by minute and suddenly those minutes add up and then it becomes day by day. And then the day by days add up and it becomes month by month. And you'll notice that healing will start coming and in the forms of being able to laugh again or being able to like go to a favorite spot that you used to go with the person who you are missing, and allowing all of the emotions to exist in your life is how we continue to move forward through our grief.
Was there a clear turning point for you in your healing journey after the loss of your son that you sort of suddenly felt, I'm not as kind of overwhelmed by grief as I was, or was it just a series of small moments that led there? Was there a turning point?
I love this because I used to believe that healing was one big moment.
Yeah.
I was waiting for this one thing to come and just change my life, change how I felt, take away the pain, bring whatever I was wanting back. But I learned that healing isn't one big moment. It's consistent movement forward, that we have to take charge of making the decisions to invite it into our life. I created a process for myself actually, and it's the work that I do, but it's called clarity mapping. Because what happens when you go through grief, things get so foggy. Your brain gets so foggy on what is real, who am I, what do I want to be doing, where do I want to go from here? And for me, sitting down and getting clear on who I was now, because I was different. I was different. I had to grieve who I was before, because that girl was no longer existing because she knew different things now. And being able to get clear on who I was and where I wanted to go next helped me learn what small steps that I had the energy to make day by day, that all could lead up into bigger choices that would continue me down this path of healing.
Interesting. And the clarity mapping, is that a guide now that people can tap you for?
It's actually a book.
It's a book. Okay, there we go.
It is. I have a book. I wrote a book on it, and I specifically work with female entrepreneurs too in their businesses, because we go through these life moments that just change everything, and being able to sit with people and help them lean into who they are now is one of the most beautiful, magical things that now I feel like it's my honor that I get to do. So yeah, it's a guide. It's the process.
No, it's amazing. And, when did I meet you? It was very early this year in person.
It was last year.
It was last year?
It was last November.
November.
Okay, that's weird because it's almost September.
Oh my God, it was last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was last November. And last year, I had experienced the first death of a family member. I lost my grandpa. And I was very naive to how I would feel about that because he was 95 and we kind of all knew that his time was coming. And he went sort of the way we all hope to go, peacefully, surrounded by family. And I thought I was going to be okay with it. Like, I thought I would be sad in a detached way, kind of how when you see suffering on TV, you're sad for those people, but you don't feel it viscerally almost. And I was wrecked by it. I could not believe how upset I was. And I remember the worst moments were always that first 2 weeks after we lost him. The first night, I remember feeling shockingly okay. Like, I think my dad told me around 6 p.m. that night. My husband came home an hour and a half later from work. And I was like, my grandfather passed. And he's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm fine. He lived a great life. I was actually okay. I was a little sad, but I was like, oh, okay. It was kind of going how I thought it was going to go. And then I was in shock. I didn't realize that. I was not at all processing I just felt shockingly okay. I was like, okay, this is going to be fine, you know. And then the next morning I woke up and I remember feeling like this when I would get dumped in the city in my 20s. There's always a moment when you wake up in the morning and you forget that the loss happened.
Yes.
And then you remember, and it's the worst fucking feeling ever. So I would wake up for the first week and forget that my grandpa just died. And like it was supposed to be a normal morning, and then remember all over again that he's never coming back in a physical form. And it would just wreck me. And so the only other time I remember feeling like that, I told my husband, was when I was dating and you get dumped or you break up with somebody and you wake up in the morning for a second, you think everything's normal and you're still with your boyfriend, and then you're not, and it's just like you were breaking up all over again. But that was the only kind of loss I had experienced, luckily, up until the point I was 33. I had never experienced real death. And I told Dave, I was like, this is so much worse because when I got dumped, even if it was with who I thought was the love of my life. And I remember telling my mom plenty of times, like, oh my God, my life is over. So-and-so left me. You know, it felt like the end of the world. But in the back of my mind, I always kind of knew, I was like, I'm going to be okay. I'm young. I can figure this out. And there's always sort of a redemption story around it. And I had the toughest time for the first month after my grandpa passed, figuring out what silver lining there was. I was like, what good can come of this? It's not like some Chad left me and I can be like, well, you know what? I'm heartbroken now, but I'll be better off later. I'm like, my grandpa's dead. Like, how do I make that a good thing? And, you know, that's when I've kind of really had to dig deep and figure out, well, what do I believe in? What happens after death? Because I wasn't raised with any religion. And I just never thought about it because I never had to, right? So I knew growing up that I wasn't an atheist. I sort of believed in a higher power just because it had felt like in my life there had been so many things that were just too coincidental to just be coincidences. But I never really had to sit down and think, well, do I believe in God? Do I believe in the universe, a higher power, whatever you want to call it? And I finally had to kind of reconcile with myself, like, what do I think about what happens after death? And so that was a really interesting that was the silver lining for me. But, you know, in your experience working with people who are grieving loss, because I assume you're working with people who are not only grieving the loss of a partner, a child, a family member, they're grieving loss in other ways. Like, do you think that grieving the loss of a marriage is similar to grieving the death of a significant other?
So I once heard, his name's David Kessler. He's another grief educator. And he once said something that I'm like, that is so good. He said, I was asked once what the worst type of grief is. And he said, I replied, it's your own.
Right.
Whatever it is that you are experiencing. What I know about grief is that there's so many different types of things that bring up grief in our life. And obviously the intensity of it is going to change based off of if it's an out of order death, meaning you lose your child, which no parent expects to lose their child, right? That goes out of the natural order. There's deaths of our parents, of grandparents. But then there's also grief that so many of us don't talk about, that we don't have a lot of conversations around, that can be the loss of a dream. Like things in your life just didn't go how you thought that it was going to go. And now you're like, what am I doing? Or it could be even the loss of a job or of a friendship that you really love, but something happened and you just aren't friends anymore. Or there's so many things that bring grief, which is why it's so important that we have these conversations, because when we aren't taught that it's okay to grieve whatever life has brought us, we can start comparing in our head and say, well, I only lost my friendship, no one died, or I only am going through this thing, they have it so much worse. And what that actually is called avoidance. All of us humans have this tricky thing called avoidance, which means that we don't actually want to acknowledge how hard something is for us, because that means we have to acknowledge how hard something is for us, and we have to feel the emotions of it and then move it through. And when we start comparing, well, what's harder or what's worse, it leads us down this path of never acknowledging our own emotions, because we're always going to come up with someone or something that is worse than what we are currently going through. And that's how we just keep running away from the pain or the reality of all of our lives.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about comparing grief, because I've done that. I said, well, I lost my grandpa, but I didn't lose my parent at a young age. I mean, my dad lost his mom very suddenly when he was 24. That unequivocally to me is worse. And so there was a part of me that felt like I didn't have the right to be as upset as I was. Also, I did not grow up with my grandfather in my life on a day-to-day basis because he lived in China, but he did spend extended periods of time living with us in the U.S. throughout my childhood. So I did have a relationship with him in some capacity, but it wasn't like I saw him every day or every week or anything like that. And so there was this sort of odd feeling like I shouldn't feel like this, right? I should be a lot more detached. I should be more reasonable. And then there was the other layer of it where I didn't want to look too upset, because I was like, well, think about how my dad must be feeling. I can't be more upset than him. It's almost like I got to put on a brave face for him, because if I'm this upset, then maybe he'll just be more upset. And it's this whole thing where we're trying to quantify how we feel. And it's this idea of, I love that you said, it's like we're running away from our own feelings. I'm like, okay, well, my mother-in-law lost her father when she was 13. He died of a heart attack. I was like, okay, well, my mother-in-law lost her father at such a young age. I should be able to handle this. Because you're trying to it's a self-soothing tactic. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's self-soothing. But then something that you just said is, I should be able to handle this. We think that grief is like how it's been taught and how we see it modeled around us is we start believing that grief is this bad emotion to feel. And that if we were stronger, we wouldn't feel it. Or if we could just push it down, then we could keep moving on. But what if grief is one of those human emotions, just like joy and excitement and love, that we're supposed to feel because we're human? And as I look at grief in that way, it allows me to handle my grief because it allows me to feel it. And I honestly think that that's one of the most brave things that all of us can do, is to sit and feel and acknowledge whatever emotions that we have. It's also interesting to me that you had a dream last night about your dad.
I want to see you again, but I never want to see you again. If this is what could happen.
Like, dang, I'm so sorry. But here's what I've been thinking about that I wanted to bring up, because I think that this is actually so beautiful, and part of what connects us as humans is that we all have the details of our lives. They're all different from each other. What you go through, what I go through, all different. But the feelings that we have, those are what we share. Those are the same. And that's what connects us. And as you had this dream about your dad, even though it didn't happen, you caught this glimpse of what it might feel like if it did.
Right.
It's those feelings, though, that allow us to have more empathy for others when they come to us and they're going through those situations. It takes being sympathetic to this next level of, oh, I understand how you must be feeling. I can only imagine what you must be feeling because I know how much I love my dad and how much like this would wreck me if this were to happen. And so I'm going to be here with you and just sit here and know that I can't fix it, but know that you have support from me as we go through this. And I think that that's such an important part of this conversation is so often these emotions that we want to just freaking run from are also the same emotions that connect us deeply together if we allow them to.
Yeah, and I think that was my mind's weird way of being like, this is how you're going to relate to Ashley tomorrow morning.
I'm like, sorry, that was your dream. That freaking sucks.
I was like, I've met and hung out with Ashley before. I was like, I don't need to relate to her on this deep level. I was like, wow. I woke up and I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. This is really brutal. It was, and I don't typically have vivid nightmares like that, which is
very interesting.
Very strange. I don't really dream that much, or if I do, I don't remember them, but I remembered this one so vividly. You know, losing my grandpa actually just also put a lot of things into perspective for me, as I think any loss does.
Yeah.
But I just realized that even at 95, when, you know, he had a full life and he had a pretty good life other than the fact that he lost his wife at an early age. He lost his wife in his 50s. He went the way we all hope to go, as I said. And I just was like, it felt like he didn't have enough time. And I always was shocked by how I felt. I was like, even at 95, it didn't feel like there was quite enough time. Like, what if he hung on for another year? And it really made me realize that we have so little time on this earth, even at 95, we should be so lucky to make it to 95, right? And so I just really, at that point, something clicked in me and I was like, I do not want to spend any time with people who I don't want to be around. So if they're draining, if they're just annoying, I mean, not to mention if they make me feel bad, professionally or personally or anything. I just stopped doing things out of obligation. It was perhaps the greatest gift that my grandfather's passing could have given me, was free up. So it freed up so much time, but it also gave me the ability to say no so much more easily. Because I was like, I could die tomorrow. And if I do, I am not spending my last day fucking at dinner with you, okay? Or at this party that I don't want to go to. And so, not that I had a ton of friends to begin with and extraneous relationships, because I was already at the point in my life where you're an adult and you don't have many groups of friends and everything, but it really kind of zoned in for me. Like, I'm not doing anything unless I absolutely want to do it. You know, barring professional commitments, obviously you can't always apply that to work, but was there anything in your life, or were there any people in your life that you cut out after you lost your son because you were like, what the fuck was I doing trying to manage this relationship or situation when there are so many bigger things in life?
Yeah. So what you're talking about right now is something that I love talking about, is that we don't realize oftentimes when we go through a loss, our values after it start rearranging. We get different priorities, obviously, because we realize, oh, like nothing, my time's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. So then how do I want to spend that time? And for me, that kind of started happening in 2017 when my husband and I went through our big, just life-changing moment. And then after we lost our son in 2020, I was brought back to that space and time again of, okay, how are we moving forward from this? Because I felt like I was in this moment where we really were rebuilding our lives and what we wanted for ourselves. And I wanted to be so intentional with what came back into it. And again, it's one of those things that I've done little by little. And there's relationships that don't exist anymore. There were business partners that I'm no longer business partners with. And that, I mean, and I can say it just so flippantly and like easily, right, on a podcast in a sentence, but that shit is so hard to sit with and then clear away and believe that you can rebuild and that it's going to work out okay. But in doing that, there's so much more peace in my life. And having more peace in my life makes space for the things that I actually want to spend my time doing and the people that I want to spend my time doing with. Now that I'm a mother again, I have a toddler, she's 2. I am such a different mom now than I would have been years ago without learning what I've learned in this way. And so that's part of my meaning making with my grief. I believe, there's a point in everyone's grieving where you can make meaning with what has happened when you're ready to. And part of that for me has been being a very intentional mother because I know that time, I'm not in control of that. And it is something that I definitely still is at the top of mind anytime I make any type of decision.
How did your faith play into your healing process? Because I talked about this earlier. I really had to figure out what the hell faith meant to me.
Yeah.
And I think where I've come to the conclusion is that I feel very spiritual. I don't feel like I belong to a denomination or any sort, but I believe in God wholeheartedly. Like, there were some weird things that happened after my grandfather passed that I was like, this is just not a coincidence. The timing of it and everything. And I got to a point in the beginning of my faith journey, I felt like I needed the people around me to believe in it too. I was like, you must believe that there is a God. I told my husband, I was like, you cannot be agnostic.
Even if you don't, I need you to believe.
Tell me you believe it. I told my parents that. And I've gotten to a point now, a year and a half later, where I'm like, I'm okay that if you believe that we die and that's it, because I believe the opposite, and I believe so strongly in what I believe in that I can't wait to prove you wrong in the afterlife. I'm sorry. I told my husband,
love that.
I was like, I'm okay with that. If you don't believe it, and it's not that he's atheist or agnostic. I think he's just got a question mark around it. But I'm like, I can't wait to haunt you later and tell you that I was right, as I usually am with all things in
You're
a
right
relationship.
on everything.
Right?
Of course.
I was like, when we're dead, I'm going to be like, see, I told you. It wasn't a coincidence. But I think you were raised with religion, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
When you asked that, I felt my heart start beating faster because this isn't something that I talk about ever, but I was raised with religion. I'm not sure how you knew that, but you knew that.
Yeah.
And
which religion?
I'm like, I don't know. Okay, let me tell you what I'm gonna say, and then maybe I won't tell you which religion, just because I don't want to offend anyone who believes that way.
Okay.
Okay.
I was like, wait. What? I was like, what religion is that bad?
I know. No, it's not that it's bad. It's that my beliefs started to change significantly after I went through grief.
Okay.
So I was raised in this religious home where I guess God was kind of put in a box of who I believed God to be, or who I interpreted him to be based off of what I was taught. Mm-hmm. And as I experienced loss and I experienced what I went through, my faith, it actually got really difficult for me because who I was experiencing God to be was different than what my brain had been taught God was all growing up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I started feeling really unaligned with previous beliefs and now current reality and the new beliefs that was bringing me. And so my faith, if we're talking from a religious perspective, was very much deconstructed. That was something I also had to grieve because it is so difficult. I don't even know the words because I've never talked about this before. It feels so deeply difficult when things that you once believed, and you based all your decisions and whole world around. It was
part of your identity.
Yeah, so much of my identity. Now I believed differently.
Right.
That had so much grief and weight attached to it, especially because of the importance that our religion played in my family. So then I had to learn, what is faith now? What is my relationship to God now? What does that look like for me? And I remember someone told me once, they said, you're allowed to be mad at God. And so that's kind of what I clung on to for a little bit while I really wrestled with, what do I believe? What do I have faith in? Because I'm really pissed at God right now. And so what does that look like? And so now for me, my faith journey, after going through what I've gone through the past several years, I don't consider myself a religious person at all, which is very different from how I grew up, but I am a very spiritual person. And I've always been a very spiritual person, but now, I can't even, it's like
No.
vocalizing this for the first time on a podcast.
This is
I'm
so
like,
interesting,
okay.
though. This is so interesting.
Yeah, it's like for the first time, though, I'm a spiritual person without the box of what I thought spirituality had to fit inside of. And that has expanded me in a way that I can't even put into words. It's expanded who I am. It's expanded my relationship with who I believe is God. It's allowed me to get more intentional in that relationship, more intuitive. But man, and I think a lot of people listening go through this. It's like either in your shoes where it strengthens this faith that maybe you didn't have yet, or it makes it stronger, or this huge deconstruction happens because you're like, well, shit, this actually isn't anything like I thought life was, and now I need to figure out, what do I believe in? I just gave you a very long, clunky answer,
That's
but I guess
amazing.
that's just still kind of where I'm at.
But I think that's so relatable because I have, even though I wasn't raised with religion, I have a lot of girlfriends who were raised very religiously in a very kind of devout way, which I think is more so our parents' generation too than ours.
Yes.
And so when they got to an age where they had to figure out what they really believed in versus what they were told to believe in, it's a very jarring process. I think it's just very jarring to figure out what you think about what happens after we die, because it happens to everyone, but it's just so final. And so I know people who are raised with a lot of religion and are now atheists. And I know obviously myself, where I was raised with no religion and, taught nothing basically. And in some ways that was even harder because I was like, well, it would be easier if somebody would tell me what the fuck would happen.
Right, what to do.
What to
Yes.
do. And it made it almost easier when I was younger to date men who came from religious backgrounds, because I never realized this is what I was doing, but I had one serious relationship where the guy was Jewish, and I had one serious relationship where the guy was very, very Catholic. And I was prepared in both of those instances to convert, essentially, or get baptized. And I think I was willing to do that because it would have been easier than having to make my own decisions about what I believed in. I was like, I will just adopt their beliefs.
I'll take on yours. I'll give you what you need.
Yeah, exactly. I think I would have had a hard time marrying into a family that was completely atheist. Like, I don't think I could have been down with that. But I was very into the idea of being okay with marrying into a very religious family because I was like, I'm a blank slate, So that was a really interesting period for me. And I think a lot of adults go through that, and grief is a part of that. And it's interesting because grief does bring up faith. And I'm in the same boat as you right now. I didn't realize you were no longer religious. I knew you were spiritual, but I didn't realize religion is no longer a part of your life at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I still hang on to a lot of the teachings, a lot of the beliefs, many of the values, right, that religion brought into my life. I think that, and I want to make sure I say this clearly, because I think sometimes people leave religion and it becomes something that they loathe, that they hate.
Well, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
And I don't feel that way. But I do feel like I now am able to just lean into my intuition a bit more and have a relationship with faith, with God, that serves me better.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to pivot a little bit because, a huge part of your content and your healing journey has actually been your relationship with your husband, who has been a very willing participant in your content. You've both been together since you were really young, which I learned when I was a guest on your podcast.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through how you met in your relationship?
Yeah. So we met in college through mutual friends, and we got married really quickly. Partly because we both grew up in the same religion, and the religious teaching was very much you get married quickly. There's no sex before marriage.
Oh, okay.
There's I was taught that my role was to be a wife and a mother, and he was taught his role was to be a husband and a provider, which is great for who that works for, right? But I think because of that pressure, we actually got married very quickly. Of course, we loved each other, but there was also this external pressure. And we talk about this often of would we had a different type of engagement? Like, would we have just been able to enjoy each other more without the pressure of, I don't know, these expectations that we were just so young trying to figure out. But so many religions have that type of pressure. So we got married, it was 23. We've been married now for 14 years. So spoiler alert, it worked out for us and it's great.
Which is incredible because most of the time when people get married that young because they feel external pressure, it actually wasn't the right person.
Right.
Clearly, he was the right person.
Right. Before him, though, I had dated a lot of guys, and I also had an on-off again relationship for that lasted several years. And so when my husband and I, Mike, started dating, and I hate saying this because I don't know, I don't believe specifically that we each have one soulmate, but we can love and make things work with people if like that feeling and is reciprocated. But I remember meeting him and having the phrase of, well, when you know, like that made sense to me because just in my heart, in my soul, I just felt like Mike was the person that I was going to want to have by my side, no matter what life was going to bring us. And now, especially when you go through loss, it impacts your marriage significantly. And it's very understandable that the divorce rates after loss go up high because you grieve differently. Things change. If someone's suppressing their emotions or has different needs, like how do you do that together? And we've figured it out. And I remember one time, and this is when I knew we were going to be okay. We had gone through just hell and back, and I didn't know for me what I needed anymore in my life. And I looked at him and I was like very clear about I didn't know where life went for me from that moment. And he just looked at me so lovingly and he said, Ashley, whatever it is that you need, I'm going to be here to support you through it every step of the way. And I just knew that we were going to figure out how to make it work. And we have. And I think that with any relationship, we've had to really learn how to be intentional with each other. And now, even when we're in this new season of being parents to this toddler, it's like, okay, again, our relationship has changed because she gets all of our attention. There's not a lot of time and energy left at the end of the day. So it's like intentionally then, how do we continue to grow together? And I think that that's the question that we've always found ourselves coming back to.
I love how you check in with one another and how you're not just sort of married on autopilot. Because I do feel like, you hear, I don't know what the statistics are, but after the loss of a child, I think there's a pretty high rate of divorce.
It's like over 75%.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not great. It's not working in your favor. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, the reason is because the marriage almost becomes a reminder of the loss of that child and the fact that it isn't there, that sometimes a lot of people just find it easier to just divorce and to leave, which is really sad. But I also think it shows, people always talk about the love languages and, are our love languages matching up? So if my love language is words of affection, but you're not great with your words and your love language is showing, acts of service, it might be a mismatch because I want to hear it, but you want to show it. I don't really care that you're showing it. I want to hear it. Do you think there's different grief languages?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And what are they?
Yes. So I don't know if there's names for the grief languages, but there's different phases, stages of grief that we can get totally stuck in. But for example, if you grew up never being taught how to express your emotions and now you're in grief, and instead of allowing yourself to express it, the opposite of that expression is anger and just being angry all the time. So you can have one spouse who's just angry all the time. They're slamming the doors. They have shut themselves off from you. They're not emotionally available. They've never been modeled how to process through it. And actually I'll give you this example because statistically speaking, obviously this does not apply for every man and every woman, but research shows us that men and women just biologically have different, and because of what society teaches us men and women are and should be, we have different ways of coping. Men oftentimes do not want to talk about it. And instead, what they do is they work more, they take on more projects, they're away from home more.
They distract.
They want to just move through it, suck it up, big, men don't cry type of thing. And women, we want to talk about it. We want someone to hear us. We want to talk about it over and over. And people sometimes will label that as being dramatic or just wanting attention. But how we process is verbalizing and going through in our minds what happened. Why did it happen? Am I safe continuing and existing in this world where scary things happen? Well, when you have one partner that's out of the house working all the time and not talking about it, and another partner who needs to talk about it, we start creating stories in our minds of this isn't affecting you like it's affecting me, or you're just pushing it away. You're pushing me away. And that's one of, I think, the hardest languages of grief. And I actually just recently heard this. I wish I came up with this because it's so brilliant and beautiful. But I saw someone say that what grief is a new language that must be learned. And as you learn your individual language of grief and then learn how to communicate with that with each other, then you're able to show up for how you need and for how your partner needs. But it takes so much communication and acknowledgement of your own emotions for that to happen.
Was your grief journey with Mike similar to that in the sense that you wanted to talk it out and he was like, I'm going to go to the office?
He was in LA all the time. He, at that time, I guess the details don't matter, but his company,
the details always matter.
They always matter. The company that he helped start up is sold to another company in LA. And so he could work remote, which he was until things got really hard. And then suddenly he was going into LA every week. And I was just home with the mess of what was going on. And I was getting a lot of resentment toward him. And it was he could go have this break and this time. And I was just in the thick of this, just alone. And it's something now. And I share this because he's talked about it, that after the situation was over and he realized that that's how he was coping, it's something that he still says that he regrets most. So then when we lost Jace, how we grieved that loss was very different because of what had happened previously. We knew what each other needed and we knew what we individually needed more than we had known in the past, even though you still have to figure it out every time.
Well, there's compromise. I'm sure you had to learn how to give him space to maybe go somewhere to process, and he had to learn how to be there with you.
Yeah.
To allow you time to chat it out, essentially.
Yeah. It was interesting, though, because my pregnancy loss, I didn't want to talk about it, actually, then. I kind of wanted to be an arm lengths away. I didn't want anyone to touch me. I didn't want I wanted to feel free, but I felt trapped in my own body. And so then have a partner come and like get in my space just felt even more claustrophobic. And again, it's like the communication so that there's stories that aren't being told. And one of the best pieces of advice I got is if you are in this situation where you know that you and your partner are just on different pages with how you are processing and dealing with things, being able to have a conversation where they don't feel like you're attacking them. This phrase, and I love using this phrase, you approach them with, hey, I've noticed your XYZ. I noticed that you are at the office a lot during this time, or I noticed that you're flying to LA a lot for work right now. The story I'm telling myself about this is that you don't want to be around me, or that this loss that is devastating me, like you're already over it. And that really hurts, or whatever that is. And then following it with, is that true? And so being able to just have a conversation where you tell them what you're noticing, tell them how the story is that you're telling yourself, and then opening the stage where you can like talk about it. Oh my gosh, it's so healing, and so many relationships would have a path forward if we knew how to communicate this language of grief. But of course we don't at first because it's so hard and new and messy.
That's incredible. And that's such a tangible thing that people can put into practice, not only with grief, but in any sort of argument in a relationship or disagreement. Like, hey, I notice you do this and it makes me feel this way. I don't know if you mean that.
Yeah.
Do you mean that? And more often than not, the answer is no. And if it's yes, then you have your...
We got to get you out of there.
Yeah, then leave. But it's so interesting because I feel like most people just jump to putting their meaning on your action. So it's like, well, you're at the office all the time. You clearly don't care about me.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden they're on the defense already, right? And so when we're on the defense, our natural instinct is just to armor up, and it doesn't leave space for productive conversation. So that is really helpful to anybody in a relationship where they might not always see eye to eye. And especially just thinking about the way men and women work.
Yes.
It's like almost like I talk to my gay friends and they're like, it is easier in some regards because we are the same. We're operating on the same plane, sort of. They're still different people.
Right.
But it's like two women in a relationship understand the way women work, and two men in a relationship understand the way men work. Okay, so we've talked about this before briefly on your podcast, but your ex-boyfriend...
I knew this was coming up.
Oh, I had to. I was like, we did not dive into this nearly enough on your pod. Your ex-boyfriend wanted you to wear a shock collar when you were in college.
And I did it.
And you did it. And before we dive into this a little deeper, because it's such a shocking story.
Shocking, literally.
Yes, no pun intended. But how old were you when you dated this guy? And what was that relationship like? Was that the on-off relationship you were talking about?
No, this was a different one.
Okay. This was another fucked up one. Yeah.
I had a lot.
Yeah.
For getting married at the age of 23,
right.
I had a lot of crappy relationships, which is so bizarre to me. But I was in college. So I probably was about between 19 and 21, 19, 20. I mean, I guess it was on again, off again for like a little over a year. We dated for a while, but then broke up and then dated and then
it's college.
Who knows?
It's college.
That feels like so long ago also, which is crazy.
I mean, it kind of was, honestly.
No,
I see
I'm
college
like,
kids now and I'm like, oh, I have aged. Despite the fact that I haven't noticed anything really that different. I'm going to have to dye my hair now. But I was like, I don't look like that anymore.
I'm like, I look like I could babysit you right now. I was just at a little cafe down the street right before this, and I guess it's by campus or something. Everyone had backpacks.
You're close to NYU.
Okay, that's where we are. Perfect. I was by NYU, but everyone, and I had my backpack that I was carrying around because I randomly have a backpack today. And I was like, Smart. We're all wearing backpacks. One of us still does not belong here right now, and that person is me. Like, I'm your mother.
Seriously. Well, you could have been a young mom to one of those kids, probably.
Oh, wait. Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm 37, so I could have been 17 there. So
that actually probably happened in your, religion, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was normal.
Very normal.
Yeah. There we go.
So
Could have given birth to one of those backpacking NYUers.
Back to the shot collar.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I was just this college young girl, like so many of us have been, who just who gave up my needs so that someone else would want me. And I think that maybe that's the pattern that a lot of us find ourselves in is, I don't care, my needs aren't important because I just want you to want me. So anyways, the relationship was, I don't even know, it just was
nothing to write home about.
I don't know, but he did meet my parents. So I guess it was.
Did they like him?
And I met his... No. No, they didn't. That should have been... Yeah, that was a big red flag. And
especially because you're close with your parents.
So
and they have your best interest at heart.
Yes. So he got a shot collar for... His dad was in town, actually. I'd met his parents multiple times, too. His dad was in town. I think it was to go hunting, and they got a shot collar for their dog to go on the hunting trip. They got it. Telling the story is just it's just bottom of the barrel, you know what I mean?
We've all been there. We've all done something stupid for a man.
But he's just like, I wonder what this feels like on a person. I'm like, okay. He's like, I don't want to try it. It's like, do you want to try it? And I'm like, okay. It was like, I was like the yes girl of, okay, let's try this shot collar. So he put it on me and he shocked it. And that's how did it
feel?
I mean, what do you think it felt like? Someone shocking you in the neck.
Right.
Like,
well, also, you don't have that fur that
there's
a dog
no protection
does
over
to protect your neck.
I said, because there's different levels of it. So I remember him being like, I won't put it on the highest one.
Thanks. Wow.
That made the producer laugh, so you know that's bad.
This is olive branch. Oh my God.
So I'm like, okay, I'll do it and just be the cool girlfriend. And obviously it didn't work out. But you know what's interesting is that we remained just like random friends on Facebook there was never like animosity there. So it wasn't like, I'm unfriending you on Facebook, which is what you did in college because Facebook, it really mattered.
Right.
So, but what I see now is that he's married with kids and it looks like he has this great, life for himself that he grew into. And so I always think about how interesting it is. Like, we can make these stupid decisions for ourselves in the moment. And then that person maybe later on is just in a different place of their life for someone else. But we can internalize that and be like, well, was it me? Or was I not good enough? That's the story I hear from so many women of not being good enough. And it's like, no, right? Yeah. Like, no.
Well, I used to think like this because I got into a very weird pattern of being the first girl a guy would date after getting out of an engagement or a very long relationship. And
mine was the opposite. I was always the last girl before they got married.
Okay. So it's always sort of the same thing. And then I always felt like they were testing out the waters with me and then they would feel like, okay, I can date again and now I don't need Anna. So I'm going to go out and meet somebody better than Anna. So I always felt like I never got the best version of the guy, but I was giving the best version of myself. Yes. And I have so many women who now DM me and saying like, what you said, I felt like he was such a jackass to me and now he's this amazing partner to the next woman he was with. Like, what's wrong with me? And I always think something happened similarly to me right before I met my husband. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe if I'd just been the second or third girl he dated, it would have worked out. Because he got the best of me, truly, and I got the version of himself where he was figuring his shit out. Like, how is that fair? And what I realize now is, like, actually looking at my life now, 6 years later, he didn't get the best of me. The best was far yet to come. And so, but I couldn't become the best version of myself without leaving him. Yes. Or without him leaving me. Let's not put it, he dumped me. I did not leave him. That was not my choice.
We can make the story be whatever you want.
Yeah, but it's like, I could not be where I am today, living this life I am today. And I love my life, without him leaving me. I look at his life now and I'm thinking, it's not bad. He's married, I think, with a kid and they're happy. But that was a life that was not for me. And I think God knew that. And that's what I've really always, I think, because I look at my friends who are sometimes in relationships or marriages that they shouldn't be in, that, God or the universe has shown up in my life in so many ways because he really has extricated the men that were not supposed to be in my life.
I feel that
when
same
I was
way.
too weak to do it myself.
Yes.
And they always left me. And you bet your ass I would have married every damn last one of them. And I would be 8,000 different religions at this point. And I really feel like there was a higher power kind of looking out for me when I was too weak to make those decisions. And that's what I think now, like my advice to people is like, if you think it's bad luck, it's actually because there's a greater plan in store for you.
It's like the phrase that I love is rejection is the protection.
Yes.
And I feel the exact same way that happened with me too.
How did you go from being the girl that was like, yes, I'll put on a shot collar, to finally realizing that you deserve to find a person who respects you as an equal, who hears you? Because I think so much of the female experience here is that we need to unlearn the fact that our worth is tied to who wants us in the male gaze. I think so many of us, when we're younger, attribute our worth to how many men find us attractive, when in fact the actual only thing that makes us feel good is how attractive we find ourselves when we look in the mirror. So how did you go through that process of untying your worth to who wanted you?
I remember that I had been cheated on again by someone who I really loved at the time. And I remember sitting on my bed just sobbing, and my mom came in and she was just sitting on my bed with me. Like, this was one of the times that before this time she had always given me the books. He's really not, he's just not into you. What is that book?
He's just not that into you.
He's just not that into you, or like these dating books, whatever. I remember she just sat there and she didn't say anything. And for whatever reason, it was like that was the final straw where I knew that I didn't want to live my life like that anymore. That I couldn't fathom, even though I was still young, I couldn't fathom living the rest of my life always trying to prove that I was who someone else wanted. And I made a decision that I never was going to be in a relationship ever again with someone who only wanted one foot in to keep the door open, then the whole rest of everything totally out, and that I was deserving of that. And I sometimes think, I hear these phrases of like, sometimes your reality, you have to get to this place where you just do not want it anymore. You cannot fathom having it anymore. And then that makes you finally change. And I think that's what it was for me. And so I started focusing on myself, and I started just wanting to become the type of person that I wanted to end up being with. And then after that, the time would come where I would meet my husband, who had also been on his own journey, because before me, he was the serial dater. And that's the other part of the story, is like, he was the guy who would just date the girls all the time, who would never commit.
He was the Chad.
He probably was the Chad. He never wanted to be a girlfriend. He never, I don't even know, like, if he would call anyone his girlfriend before me. He would never introduce anyone to his family. I mean, and he's the greatest human, greatest husband, greatest partner, greatest dad ever, right? But it's like we both had to go on the journey where when we met, that we were capable of being that version of ourselves, that it would connect. And even though he might have been a bad partner to the women before me, he was ready and I was ready to choose something different. And so it wasn't easy, but that's what we chose and still choose every day to do together.
But I love that, because I think that we're all collateral damage in everyone else's story. And I know I have acted poorly in relationships.
Same.
And we're all the good and the bad guy at some point in our lives, right? And I think about the fact that maybe a lot of the guys that I talk about in my videos now, they went on from our relationship and they didn't do that to the next woman.
Yeah.
And that's great.
And we hope that.
And we
right?
hope that, right? And maybe they're different people, because I certainly think the core of me is the same, but I think I had to get to what the core actually was through all those relationships. I remember when my ex left me before I met Dave, I really needed actually to be dumped by him, because it was the first time that I finally felt like my life wasn't over because my boyfriend left me, because it was the first time in my life that I was financially stable on my own. And so I was sad, but it wasn't this sort of I'm sad and I'm really broke and like I can't depend on my boyfriend for anything. I had, for the last 2 years, been building up my career in real estate, and I felt really good. I was like, I love my job. I have disposable income for the first time. I'm paying my way through life. And I just remember thinking when he left me, I was like, I'm going to be okay. I'm really sad, but I'm also so invested in all these other aspects of my life. And there was a freedom there that I was like, I probably needed that to happen, because then, and only then, could I go into meeting my husband fully as a fully formed human being, being like, I want a partner, but I don't need a partner to survive, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when we go through a breakup, which is a loss, I think the biggest loss that we feel is the loss of ourselves. We feel like we just lost a piece of ourselves, which I felt time and time again. I'm sure you felt before you met Mike. And that's the thing that most people say when they're asking for advice from me, is like, I feel like I just lost this huge part of my identity. And I remember, I can't remember where I read this, but I used to tell myself this all the time when I would feel this loss. I'm like, be a fucking starfish. And let me explain what that.
I feel like I love this already.
I was like, just be a starfish. You are a starfish. So I learned that starfish, they're one of the most incredibly resilient creatures on this earth. They can lose most of their body and still survive and regenerate as long as the central disc and one arm remains. Okay. So they can completely recover, which is wild thinking about that, because that's essentially saying, okay, well, if we lost everything, but we still had our torso and our arm, we could regenerate the rest of us. But it can take up to a year for them to completely recover from that. And so I always remember that. I was like, okay, starfish can literally go through getting 80% of their body eaten off and come back and be a whole starfish again. And I would just kind of tell myself this every now and then to remind myself that I have the ability to regenerate as well, emotionally. Right. I'm cheesy as fuck, but this is how my mind works
so much.
I was like, I need to work in metaphors. I was like, baby, you're a starfish. Insert that joke right there. Okay, so were there any stories that you told yourself, or any little things that you kind of had to remind yourself of during your darkest days of loss, where you were like, this silly little analogy or story helped me survive?
That's such a good question. But first of all, I feel like you need to make merch, and it needs to say "Be a starfish" or "I'm a starfish." Can that come? I just feel like I want a shirt right now that says "Be a starfish," and I would wear it everywhere.
Starter. Okay, yes.
So
all right.
just put that in the back.
Works.
If this happens, this was created here on this podcast episode, and I want credit. Thank you. Now. Was there anything, man? You know, I don't know. I to be totally honest, I feel like there were a lot of days that were harder and darker than there were days that were bright and hopeful. And I remember one day looking at my niece and nephew, who were little at the time. They had to have been like 1 and 3. So this was, 7 years ago. And I remember looking at them and telling myself, I want to be here for them as the best version of me when they get older. Like, I want them to remember me, and I want them to remember an auntie who they loved being around. And in order to do that means that I have to commit to staying here. And I also have to commit to rebuilding who I am so that I can find that light again. So I wish I had like this story, maybe that I could pass on. But the reality of it for me was I just had to take it one day at a time. And I found the people for at the moment that got me through until the person who could get me through was myself. And that's, I think, when I noticed that I was healing, was that it no longer was just for other people, but it was for me. And that has just taken me one little decision at a time.
That's great. Well, thankfully, you actually do have a child now. So you have a daughter.
Yes.
And you've recently talked about how you're not sure if you can go through pregnancy again, and how it sounds like the answer is no.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So she's going to be an only child.
She'll be an only child. And man, it's so hard because I would love to have another baby. And I also know what happens to my body when I'm pregnant. And now that...
Yeah, sepsis.
Yeah, sepsis, right? And now I'm like, there's more to lose, right? Like she's here, and to go through a third pregnancy, I'm also 37, and not that that's old, but the recovery, like it's just different now. If I could go into a pregnancy knowing that'd be healthy and okay, yes, sign me up. I want another baby. But I think that that's something that I've kind of had to grieve of just knowing it's not what I thought it was going to be, but damn, it's still so good. And I just want to enjoy it instead of being in this mindset of just waiting for that next milestone or that next thing that's going to make me happy. So it's actually for this, we're here in New York, and going back to what we had talked about like time just becomes more just palpable. Like I'm just so more aware of how I spend my time. I always have said my whole life, one day I'm going to have a daughter, and like on her 10th birthday, we're going to have this dream New York City trip. I want to take my kids like to wherever they want to go on their 10th birthday. That's always been my thing. And as I was planning to come to New York, my daughter's only 2, but like so strongly, just in my heart, I was like, why do I have to wait till she's 10? Right. I've waited so long for her to be here. We're going to go, and we're going to go right now. And it has been the funnest trip ever. And even though she's so little, anytime we've gone to do something, she looks at me and she goes, this is so fun. She's like starting to string her sentences. And it's just been this moment of, life doesn't look how I thought it was going to be too, but it is so good still.
And you don't need to wait to start living. You don't need to wait till she's 10. You can just do it now.
Yeah, or till we have another baby or what that. It's like, this is it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, this isn't so much a question as it just is sort of a statement of reinsurance as an only child and an only daughter, because I know you had said that the fear of your daughter being an only child is that she's going to be alone one day, because eventually, you and Mike, presumably if things go according to plan, would pass before her. And I want you to know from the other side that I loved being an only child. I am incredibly close with my parents in a way that most people aren't. They are my best friends. And I love my husband, but I'm like, I would be.
I love mom and dad.
I love my mom and dad. I'm so close with them. And, our house, even though our family was so small, we have no relatives in the U.S., was filled with so much love that I have found was even more so than traditionally big families that I've experienced of my friends and peers. And that's not to say that every big family is a real life version of Succession and everyone hates one another and all of that. It's just to say that just because there's less people doesn't mean there's less love.
Yes. I love that.
But also, I think that your daughter will one day find a partner in crime, and that will become her physical family when you and Mike are her spiritual family one day. And so I just want you to know that she's going to be okay as an only child, because I love my life as an only child. And in some ways, it's made life a lot easier as an adult because my parents are nearing retirement and they live outside of Philly right now. We're in Connecticut and they're going to move closer to be like near us and be nearer to our eventual grandchild one day. Whereas if I had a sibling that was living in California, I mean, they're not going to do that. They can't pick and choose. So
we're following her across the country. So I'm glad that you love that they will be where you are.
My dream is a family compound. I want to live next door to my parents.
We talk about this all the time. It sounds like my dream come true, honestly.
Like my dream is to have a little girl and like repeat the same thing. And Dave and I are also thinking about only having one child, mostly because I haven't tried to get pregnant yet, so I don't know what that experience is going to be like. So hopefully we can even have one naturally, but also because I think at 2 children, we've heard from people that somebody's career takes a hit. It just becomes very difficult. One child is very easy to manage because there's always somebody you can kind of relay between the two.
Tag team.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's interesting that our society here has sort of put upon all of us that we should have more than one child. And it's a very Western thing because I don't know if you know this about China. For a very long time, there was a one-child policy.
Yeah.
So my generation, our generation of people in China, they're all only children. It's only recently have they started enacting, okay, you can have more than one child because now the population is not doing well because we had this for decades. And so it's a very Western societal pressure that we need to have more than one child because one child isn't enough. I don't know where that comes from. But I also want to say that, you know, I think there's this assumption that only children are really selfish and weird and socially maladapted and everything. And I'm very fucked up. So this is not to say that I'm not fucked up because I'm an only child. I am fucked up in many different ways. But I will say that I've met plenty of people who have siblings who are equally as fucked up as I am. Yeah. Because I believe that like having a brother or sister doesn't automatically make you a well-adjusted human. No. That you can be a selfish prick even if your parents taught you to share with your siblings growing up.
Oh, of course. So, and I know so many people, I have so many friends, family who have siblings, and there's not a solid relationship there. And so a lot of people will be like, well, don't you want to give her a sibling? It's like, well, in an ideal world, if there's an ideal situation, but we don't get to choose how anything works out. So I love that you just shared all that with me. Thank you.
I see very fucked up sibling relationships where at best there's no relationship. So it's not antagonistic. It's just we don't really talk. We're very different people. That's it. You know, it's almost like a cordial relationship, which is sad.
So sad.
And at worst, it's very, very hostile. And then I see on, you know, our parents' generation, I know friends' parents who have terrible relationships with their siblings. And then when the parents pass away and there's anything to inherit and split up, it gets very ugly because everyone's just in it for themselves and they hated the sibling anyways to begin with. And so it does make it easier to be an only child in many ways. And I don't think she's going to, she is going to be well-adjusted if you raise her to be that way, not because she has a sibling running around annoying her. Right? So I want to end on this question. Okay. I think rejection and success are 2 sides of the same coin. And you cover a lot of facets in your content online. You talk about obviously grief and loss, but you also talk about body positivity and how you're the happiest you've ever been, even though you're heavier than you were when you were in the depths of your grief and everybody was like, oh my God, you look so great, you're so skinny. You're like, I haven't eaten because I'm depressed in 3 months. Is there a rejection that you faced that you really felt was a pivotal point for you because you were like, that kind of changed the gears in my head and led me to this awesome life I'm living today?
I think there's been multiple times, but the one that really sticks out is after we went through a first big loss. It was in 2017. And my dream my whole life has been to be an author. It's why I started a blog back. I mean, this was before social media started, like blogspot.com. I was starting my blog when blogging kind of became a thing. So I wanted to have an online community that I could pour into. And then one day, maybe I'd be a published author. And I had gotten a top literary agent who had found me in 2017. And we made a book proposal together. It took a whole year. And I mean, this was the type of agent who was getting like high 6-7 figure deals for clients, like was not taking them unless he knew for certain he'd be getting you a big check. So I was so excited. And the final, so in the publishing world, what happens is your book proposal, meaning like what you want to write the book about, and you put some chapters together, it goes to bid. And the publishers have the opportunity to bid, meaning they'll tell you what they want to pay for it if they want to pick you up. And usually if you have an agent, it means like you're going to get picked up because they don't waste their time. Mm-hmm. So it's the last day of bid, and we were waiting for this publishing house who had expressed a lot of interest to send over their final bid. And the other ones had passed because of some of the things in the book they wanted me to do that I just, in integrity, didn't want to do. And so I was like, I'm going to hold true to me and not do this. Anyways, the day came, and my husband and I had planned a trip to Europe for 2 weeks to like celebrate this book that I was going to be writing. We were leaving the next morning. It came, and we got an email from the agent and my publisher or the publisher we had wanted, that said, you know, after thinking about it, after taking this to all the internal team, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to pass on this right now. And I remember feeling so, oh my gosh, there was like nothing left for me to give the world or myself. We went to Europe. I moped. Also had a great time. Ate a lot of pasta. You know, I'm like, all right, lose, win. It's okay. But it was that moment where for myself, for the first time in a while, was like, I don't actually need a top publisher for me to write a book. So what happened was I wrote my book anyway. We launched it internally. My team put on, this was pre-pandemic. It was actually right in 2019, started 2020. My team and PR company, we put on a whole book tour, sold out. We hit bestseller lists as a self-published author, which is like...
That's wild.
Crazy. And so then I ended up getting 2 book deals with the same publisher who first rejected me. But it was this moment of like finding that fire again in myself that I had been missing, to finally be like, I don't need to keep waiting for other people to accept or approve of what I'm wanting to do. I can do it either way. And that, and then seeing the result of that has really helped me keep moving everything that I'm working on forward.
That is so inspirational. What a way to end. Thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you?
You can come find me. I love connecting online on Instagram. My community there is Ashley K. LeMieux. It's my name. You can find my podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. It's called Healing Her. There's actually a great episode on there with Anna. So you can go listen, and can't wait to meet you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.